better daily, where we work hard in our minds, bodies, and our spirits to become 1% better every single day. Download the app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.life to catch the video version of these podcasts. Here's your host and my dad, Alex Van Houten.
What's up, Betterment family? This is Alex Van Houten in Better Daily Live. Happy Wednesday. It's Wildcard Wednesday. And on Wildcard Wednesday, I usually dig back into the past and find something valuable that's worthwhile to bring to you. And today, I've got something valuable for you. This is an awesome conversation with a somatic movement specialist that I got to interview about 2.5 years ago. And this individual and I actually go back further than that. We taught personal trainers through their anatomy and kinesiology curriculum about 5 years ago. Well, 5 years ago then. 7. Wow. I just realized how old I am. Okay. Or how young. Some of you would say how young. Good morning, KT. Good to see you this morning. This is a great conversation. I wasn't very good at titling at this point in time. This was one of the early conversations that I had. I think it was episode 70 of Defining Dad Bod. And I called it Ultimate Biohacking, Conscious Movement with Somatic Specialist Kayla June. And I mean, that doesn't tell you jack, but let me give you a little backstory or understanding. There's some research coming out right now about what makes exercise effective in changing us at the level of our DNA. You've heard me on here talk about that before, right? It's called epigenetics, which is the idea that there are parts of you that are locked up inside of your DNA code, just hanging out in your cells. And there are stressors that you can apply to that in order to unlock better in you, right? And scientifically speaking, that's called the methylation of your chromosomes or the acylation of your chromosomes. Depends on if you're turning on a switch or turning off. Like if I'm turning on thicker, denser muscle fibers, that's called hypertrophy. We get that with 3 to 5 sets of 6 to 12 repetitions of really heavy weight, right? With about 90 seconds rest in between. Hopefully some good carbohydrates to fuel the muscles, and boom, there you go. You've methylated the gene that unlocks stronger, denser, more metabolically active muscle fibers. And then acylation is the turning off of a gene, right? So we might turn off insulin resistance, right? So when we start a cardiovascular program, for instance, or lower our sugar intake, and we were struggling with insulin resistance prior, the process that reduces insulin resistance, that makes you more insulin sensitive, is the acylation of genes that would make you insulin resistant. Anyway, all that to say, you know that the results of our workouts are not just calories burned. So what's happening in the research right now is, okay, well, how do we get to epigenetic change? Is it the duration of the workouts? Is it how hard you're working? Like, what is it? And it turns out that the primary factor, not the only factor, but the primary factor in exercise that will change you at the level of your genes is intensity. Now, the researchers have a hard time defining intensity, though, because, the question is it better to go run 20 miles really slow, or is it better to do 15 minutes of high-intensity interval training? And by better, I mean which one of those changes you at the level of your DNA in a way that's lasting for the body. And so if you're looking at mitochondrial density, for instance, running 20 miles, if you survive it, isn't going to change your mitochondria very much 2 months from now. But doing some high-intensity interval training such that you wear the muscles down to where they don't have much left, but they have the opportunity to recover without it being overly stressful, that will change your mitochondria 2 months from now. And so right now we're talking and I say we, the scientific community, are talking, having a conversation about how do we define intensity in exercise? Because let's say I'm doing a chest workout. Do I need an hour-long chest workout that hits all the different muscle groups and makes really good use of the programming variables? I would argue that there's a utility in that's a good thing. Or do I just need to do 3 minutes of push-ups until I fail, and then try again until I fail, and then try again until I fail, and just have a 10-minute chest workout and I'm good, right? Well, the question is, what does it mean for the workout to work for you, right? Because, 3 minutes of push-ups to failure might be great until you end up with rotator cuff problems because you have underdeveloped stabilizers, which is what your 90-minute workout would do. All that to say, this conversation that I'm linking you to has a different spin on the idea of intensity. Because intensity could be muscle failure. Intensity could be how heavy the weights are. Intensity could be how short the rest periods are. Intensity could be how much pre-workout you drank before this workout, right? And maybe even adding a workout partner to the mix. I always work out harder, more intensely. If I have an individual that I'm working with, maybe competing with a little bit, maybe being a little more focused on my own form because they're also focused on me doing it right. And I want to set a good example and be the trainer, right? But this conversation with Kayla June talking about somatic movement lends a different idea to the question of intensity. And what we talk about is the consciousness of a movement to create intensity from the inside out, right? So imagine you're doing an exercise you've done over and over and over again, right? Let's say squats or lunges or leg press, or I've spent a lot of hours in a weight room. There's not many exercises I haven't spent at least 100 hours on, if not 1,000 hours on. So it's easy for me to get mindless about something, right? And imagine the same thing for you, something you've done over and over and over again, mindless about that exercise. Or maybe, let's take a different example for a moment. Starting your car. Starting your car is actually a really complex process. Like when you break it down to its individual parts. First of all, you have to find your keys, which in my house can be tough sometimes because they're not always where I left them. You have to find your keys, right? That's a process. You have to walk around. Your eyes have to search around and pick out, no, those aren't keys. That's a button. No, those aren't keys. Those are bills. No, those aren't keys. That's a kitchen plate. No, those aren't keys. That's kids' socks. Like, there's a very complex process that goes into finding your keys. Finally, you find your keys. Then you have to tell your hand to make a key-shaped, grasp and pick up the key, right? And then you have to carry the key, and then you have to go all the way to your car, and then you have to put the key in the ignition, and then you have to turn it just so, but not too long, and then back, right? But you do all that automatically. You don't even have to think about it. It's a mindless task, right? I'm going to start the car. You've done it thousands of times, I'm sure. And so you don't have to think about it. The same thing could be said about exercise movements that you've done before. You just do them. Like, I'm going to do pull-ups, I'm going to do push-ups, I'm going to do sit-ups, I'm going to do squats, right? And you don't even think about it. You just do them, and maybe you're counting, maybe you're thinking about something else, maybe you're listening to a podcast, maybe you're listening to music. But what we talk about in this conversation is how to take your mind and put it so intently on what you're doing that it requires your body to work harder and more intensely, and so that you get more out of the exercise itself. This is the mind-body connection. And if you've ever had the opportunity to talk to a bodybuilder who really knows what they're doing and they're not too roided out or whatever, they would tell you that the mind is the most important part of their workout. It's not the pre-workout, it's not the muscles, it's not even the carbs they eat afterward. It's how focused they are on targeting the right muscles to do the movement well and to really dig into it. Because a bodybuilder who's really good at what they do and have been doing this for 20, 30 years and their joints haven't turned to dust yet, that guy isn't lifting super heavy weight all the time. What he's actually doing, or what she's actually doing, is using their mind to create intensity on the muscle groups that they want to target. And I'm having a hard time not making this sound like a muscle-headed thing. This is really important if you're trying to prevent injuries in yourself or reduce pain. Let's say you have back pain, and what you're trying to do is to do a squat movement pattern without hurting your back. It requires a lot of consciousness on your part when you squat. Don't just drop your butt down like you're sitting into a seat or something. You have to put your mind in your muscles. You have to hinge your hips back. You have to place the same amount of force on both feet. You have to sit in your heels a little bit and dig your toes into the ground, right? And then you have to dip your hips back and keep your legs contracted as you dip your hips back, right? Your core is engaged, everything's solid and strong, and we haven't even started the squat yet, and all of a sudden you are conscious, your mind is in your muscles, you're conscious of how you're moving, and then you can move through that movement pattern with less pain and better muscle activation. And what happens when you activate your muscles well is that in the future, when you go to do a squat, they do it automatically. The muscles activate automatically, and you reduce your opportunities for back pain over time. And so this is a great conversation because what it does, she's better at it than I am. She's got the dancer, Pilates, yoga instructor kind of voice around targeting the tiniest little things in your body and helping you become conscious of things you didn't know that you could become conscious of. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview. I recently revisited this conversation just because it was so rich, and 2.5 years later, I'm still enjoying it and learning from it. And for somebody who spends a lot of time doing exercise and teaching other people how to do exercise, it's saying a lot that I can keep coming back to this conversation and getting something out of it. So I hope you enjoy it as well. Guys, this has been Alex Van Houten in Better Daily Live. I'll see you guys tomorrow for Word Thursday. And until then, it's just 1%. You got this. Today's show is going to be amazing because I have been looking for a professional in my space to have this conversation with for a very long time. And that conversation is the one about the link between our conscious and our subconscious mind and the movements that we perform in ourselves. I'm really excited about how this conversation turned out. The first thing I hope that you'll take away is the deep interplay between the decision to move and your control over your conscious mind, or in layman's terms, exercising and choosing to exercise can have a powerful impact on your ability to control your thoughts, your actions, your beliefs, and your motivations. And the second thing I hope you take away from speaking with our somatic movement expert, Kayla June, is how simply you can start incorporating the elements of somatic movement into your day, starting right now. Having been in the fitness industry for 14 years, I know that this is a deep and powerful conversation that I have not heard anywhere else, so I'm really excited for you to jump into it. Now let's get to this fantastic conversation between me and Kayla June on how to tap into the power of our subconscious mind through the movements that we perform. What's up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing well, and I'm super excited to bring this conversation to you. We haven't even had it yet, but it's going to be amazing, and it's going to mess with your head in a good way. I've got a special guest, Miss Kayla June here. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a second. Kayla, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. It's Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. Actually, this is going to come out on a Monday, so happy Monday to all of you listening.
Great.
Defining Dad Bod. But it's Friday for us, and we're bringing some of that Friday energy and joy your way. You can connect with Miss Kayla if this conversation really digs deep into your soul and teaches you something about yourself. You can find Miss Kayla at kaylajune.com, and that's KAILAJUNE.com. Now, Kayla, I've been wanting to have this conversation with somebody for, it seems like months. You know, and when you're a parent and you're running a business and stuff, you have these things that are just gnawing in the back of your mind. We're going to talk about the back of the mind in a second, but these things that are gnawing in the back of your mind and you just mean to get to them. And I want to thank you before we even get into this. I want to thank you because I've been wanting to talk about this topic, the conscious and the subconscious and somatosensory system and what we can do to tap into better relaxation for ourselves. I wanted to have this conversation for a while. So just thank you in advance. This is going to be awesome. Look at those namaste hands. So I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to my audience and listeners and help them understand where you're coming from. You've got quite the superhero origin story, and you have such a unique background with regard to exercise, fitness, training, and your own personal practice and journey as well. So I'm excited to hear about that and help us understand where you're coming from.
Thank you so much, Alex. I am really happy to be here with you having this conversation, something that's really meaningful to me and that I'm passionate about. Let's see, in terms of titles that I work under, I'm a registered somatic movement educator and a certified fitness professional. I'm also a mother. My daughter will be 18 on Monday. So when you're listening to this, it'll be her 18th birthday. And I have a son who's 15. I've been teaching movement longer than I've been doing any other activity. So I grew up in my mom's dance studio, and I've been teaching since I was a preteen. And then I ended up going to the University of Montana to get a BFA in dance and choreography. And I was introduced to the somatic movement field. And in my 20s, during the time that I was in school, a lot happened for me. So I had a severe injury that happened while dancing and training. I had 2 kids, and I also had an experience of waking up to repressed memory from my childhood. So there were a lot of big events in my life, and somatic movement, somatic psychology, somatic body work, it really brought me through. So I feel very convinced how it can influence our life in a positive way. I'm also really interested in performance, and this is where Alex and I really cross over. And so as my questions continued to deepen about how to encourage performance in safe, effective ways so that I could still be rolling around on the floor and dancing at 80, I came into the personal training field and went into exercise science and eventually got a master's in exercise science. And here's the thing, what came really clear to me once I moved over to kind of the quantitative, evidence-based, goal-oriented side is that it was the exact opposite kind of training as the other side of movement education, which was about quality, process, discovery, kind of experiential learning. And I just knew there needed to be, that these two worlds needed to talk, basically. That there was an opportunity to create a bridge between what I really call the movement education continuum. And so that's what I'm doing now. 1 year ago, I started an online program for movement teachers, really all about this conversation, which we call embodied movement science. So I'm celebrating 1 year of having that program online, and I have movement teachers from all over the US and Canada and Scotland and Guatemala, yoga teachers, gyrotonic teachers, body workers, fitness professionals, dancers, and we're all in a room together having this conversation.
This is awesome. So if anybody didn't follow the idea of the continuum of exercise education, she just laid out like that's a master course all by itself. Like, hey, there's a spectrum of movement education and this is what it looks like. So if you want to think of it this way, Kayla is like the female Yoda with regard to movement education. She wouldn't call herself that. She's laughing at me right now because she's too humble for that, but I'm throwing it down. We got the female Yoda of movement education with us. Kayla, thanks for that. For the listeners, could you help? This is a very complex topic, and this isn't actually what I said we were going to start with, but could you help us understand a working definition of somatic movement? Because I understand that's something we're going to talk quite a bit about in this conversation. And, you know, when I think of going through some really hard times as, you know, a developing adolescent or young man, I don't know if I would have classified it as somatic movement, but I would tell you that when I got really like just destroyed inside, I'd have to go for a run all by myself, and it might be for a very long time. And in running somehow carried me through a lot of really hard times in my life. And I would say that I run to make my life make sense, and something about that experience, the movement and the stress or strain of it, and then finding peace even in the difficult, like summer sun of Tennessee, humid days, you know, and that is what I understand as like a really powerful piece of my story. And I would connect with a lot of trainers who would say something similar, like movement saved me in some form or fashion. But you say something very specific. Somatic movement carried you through some rough times. So could you give us a working definition of that so that as we refer to that over this hour in this conversation, that it'll resonate with the people listening?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a really good question. And I'm glad you brought up the piece about running. Oftentimes, somatic movement education is considered as something that's very slow and kind of dropped down and low effort and low energy. But really, it's an approach that we have to being in the experience of moving. So if we back up and kind of look at the root word is soma. And in this case, we're talking about not just the cell, as soma might be defined in like a biology textbook, but we're really talking about the body in its wholeness. And we are speaking to the fact that we each have an experience of living in our body, right? I mean, we all talk to ourselves more than we talk to anybody else, right? Constantly talking to myself, I'm thinking to myself, I'm feeling in myself. We would call that the soma. So in somatics as a field, we're really interested in getting a conscious experience of who we are in this lived experience of self. Okay, so that brings us to somatic movement education. So this is quite simply mindful movement that's consciously internally sensed. So it's really taking the mind out of the driver's seat, bringing the mind into the back seat, witnessing the body as it moves. So we might kind of look at this as an inner experience of movement, as opposed to what we often see the body objectified in the environment as shape or movement, much like we'd look at a car or a bicycle or some other kind of machinery. But the body is biological. We're a living, alive being. So this experience that we each have on the inside is very influential into the way we see the world and who we are in it.
So if I could just hone in on one key piece there, which was the conscious experience of the body in motion. Is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's about what I heard. And the idea being you can move without thinking. You know, you go for a walk and you just walk, and you might even get lost in your walk. And then you're like, oh, I've walked this same area 3 times, you know, or I just got done hanging out with Gabriel at the trampoline park. Party, by the way. It's so much fun to hang out with a 3-year-old at a trampoline park. You know, you're hopping and stuff, but every once in a while you're there. You're actually there. You're not just chasing a 3-year-old. You're not just like lollygagging around. You feel each jump and you're experiencing when you hit the trampoline and you roll, and well, that's how you play. But the point being that there's a conscious experience with that. I like your analogy of taking yourself out of the driver's seat of your body, putting yourself in the back seat so that you have, I guess, the freedom or maybe the bandwidth to experience the actual movement of the vehicle. Would that be a good way to reword what you said?
Yeah, I think that sounds very clear. And this is opposed to that autopilot, you know, that you were talking about. How often have you gotten into a car and, you know, all of a sudden you're at your destination and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? Like, what just happened?
Well, we've all had that experience where the wife or significant other tells us, hey, I need you to grab this on the way home. And, you know, you pull up in your driveway and you're like, oh, dang it. Like, I missed the turn over there to get I'll be right back. That autopilot, that's a beautiful way to put it. So this segues perfectly into actually what I had intended to start with in our conversation, which now that we have a working definition of somatic movement. So this blew me away last year. And this is why I've been waiting to have this conversation with somebody who could speak this stuff, you know, specifically with regard to movement, because otherwise it just sounds like brainiac stuff. Last year, I read that neuroscientists have quantified, or at least as much as we're able to, quantified the amount of consciousness that we have, or conscious control that we have over our own actions, thoughts, feelings, and movements. And that number came to 5%, meaning that with the rest of the brain, there's 95% activity going on that we're just not even aware of or have control over. So right now we're having this conversation. And if you're listening to this conversation, you might be consciously tuned into what's going on. But also there's a bunch of other stuff happening in the background, you know, like there's parts of your brain and spinal column that are telling your thyroid to fire a certain amount of thyroid hormone into the system right now. If you're not thinking about it, you're breathing. You're not going to die of asphyxiation right now. You're just going to breathe, you know, not even thinking about it. Your heart's beating. Your hands might even be moving. You might be looking around. If you're watching this, listening to this, something like that in the car. Don't watch this in the car. That's bad. But you might be looking at the kids playing on the playground or noticing that the sign for your exit's coming up, but you're not really in tune or conscious of controlling that. And it blew me away, Kayla, to read that. It messed with my head pretty hard. And I want to have this conversation. We can dive into it in a bunch of different ways. But I guess first, it tripped me out. It tripped me out to think that there's 95% of me that's just back there, just chilling, doing weird stuff. Who knows what's going on back there? You know, I'm sleeping in my bed and I wake up and I'm like, why were zombies and dragons there? Like somewhere in that 95% it's going on. And I guess my question to you is, first, I know you read the same thing. How did it strike you? What was the first thing that came to your mind? And then why does this matter? Why does this matter? Because I have my own thoughts, but I would love to hear yours.
I felt the same way, absolutely blown away. And I had this thought of, okay, even those human beings on the planet that are what we might call highly evolved and very much into dedicating their life to practicing awareness in one way or another. And I thought, wow, even they would have 95% or something of their consciousness as, or we'll say cognitive activity as subconscious. Right? So that's the thing. It's like out of all of our cognitive activity, 95% is subconscious. Blew me away. Absolutely. And really empowered me with another level or layer of the importance of somatic movement education and what it's really doing to help us promote why it matters. Okay. So why does it matter? Well, Most of us have been in a time in our life when we want to change a habit. We want to change something about ourselves. Those of us that are in fitness and really interested in training movement, it might have been a movement pattern. This could be a way that we orient in a relationship. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we are interested in changing about ourselves if we are in a kind of transformative pathway in our lives. And those of us that are parents, we typically kind of really wake up to this as soon as we have somebody else to care for, right? Because all of a sudden they're reflecting back to us, not just our best stuff, they're giving us some truth that we're not really all that interested in seeing. So we start thinking about, well, how can I be a better human being? Okay, we're looking at habits. Well, part of what's in that other 95, as I like to call it, is not only those things that you talked about, which is all of the workings of our inner body. I'm so glad I don't have to think about breathing, right? And I do think about breathing, and we'll get to that, but that my body will breathe itself without me having to direct it. My body will beat its heart without me having to direct it. There is something else, though, in that other 95, which are all of these drivers for our habit. So we might think about motivations, beliefs, personal orientation, the way I see the world, my perception of the world, memories. I almost call these like association maps. Mm-hmm. These are our neural networks, right? That kind of weave together different patterns of thought. Well, all of that's in the other 95. So if we are in a process of wanting to change something about ourselves and we're only working with the 5% we already know, we're missing out on a great opportunity for meaningful and sustainable change.
So I hate to bring like a potentially loaded phrase to this, but it reminds me of writings from the New Testament, Paul, and he said it in this way, like, the things that I don't want to do, I do. And the things that I want to do, I don't. And it's like, if you have 5% of you working with you, but the other 95% is just kind of doing its thing, and you're trying to fight that, and you're not training that, you're not harnessing all of that power that you have, the other 95% of you, you're not harnessing it to move in the same direction as you, you're going to be in a rough spot. So this is not what we're talking about today, but the only concept I can come up with, or the only example I can come up with, is just really easy to understand. It's from a nutritional perspective. I talk about balancing blood sugar to control one's insulin, right? And if you're on a blood sugar roller coaster, if your blood sugar is really low, you don't crave chicken and avocados, all right? Like if you've plummeted because you ate like garbage this morning and you drank too much caffeine and now you're kind of shaky and hungry, you're not going to crave the foods that you would like to be craving to be healthy and fit. You're going to be reaching for the donut in the break room, and you're like, why at the end of the day did I eat that? Why did I do that? And that's like a big part. That's a big giant piece of a motivational driver for you. The decision to eat good food is not nearly as strong as the deep drive to keep your blood sugar relatively stable. That's way deeper. So we're talking about this from a movement perspective. And I have experience from a psychological perspective helping people to develop good habits and create behavioral change. But I love the idea of somatic movement, and that's your wheelhouse. I love the idea of being able to tap into the other 95% and not only train it movement wise, but maybe get some of it on board, and if possible, even expand some of our conscious experience. Perhaps we could have more than that 5%, but if we can't, at least we can get the other 95 on the same page. So how does this relate? How does this question of subconscious and conscious ability with regard to our cognitive activity, how does this relate to somatic movement in your mind?
Well, you bring up a couple of things that I think relate to answering that question. And one is, what is it like to respond in our life rather than react? So in that story that you just gave about, grabbing the donut at the end of the day, that was an automatic, habituated reaction. Now, obviously, there were steps that needed to be taken during the day so that that individual had enough kind of mindset space and also, physiological kind of balance to respond to a different choice. But this is really where the turning point for any habit occurs, is our desire to make a new choice and to do that consciously. So one thing that somatic movement education does really well is creates a gap between what we sense and what we perceive. Now, this is really important because we could think about a basic learning cycle being sensation, perception, and then action. And then my action in the world with the environment gives me information and new sensory experience that then I process through perception, and then I move again. Sensation is the raw data, the raw information coming into our systems. And if we look at, maybe we back up here for a moment and take a really basic look at the nervous system. So sensation is basically bringing information about the environment to the central nervous system, right? And then we've got those motor neurons that are basically taking information from the sensory nervous system out into body movement.
Okay, this is going to sound really elementary, but is it like when really cold water hits you in the hand and you think it's hot, and so you pull away because you think you're getting burnt? Because the sensory information for really hot and really cold is pretty close, but the perception is, if I know it was cold, there's no reason to jerk back. But if I thought it was going to burn me and my perception was that's hot water, that's not going to work out very well for me, and I pull back, that's where the motor neural network responds to the perception rather than just the sensation. Is that a good example?
Here's the thing about that is that that's a reflex arc. So that doesn't ever go up to the brain. It basically just travels through the spinal cord. And thank goodness we have that reflex, because no matter if it was hot or cold, what we want is the body to withdraw. So we definitely can train reflexive or reflex action through somatic movement, especially through neurodevelopmental patterning. For that perception piece to come in, it's more kind of like the tag or attachment that I put on what I'm experiencing. Right? So I have sensory information coming into me and I'm already feeling a certain way about it, thinking a certain way about it, believing a certain way about it, attaching some kind of value to it, attaching a belief to it. And then I move in the world with all of that kind of jumbled together. And that's really where the repatterning process begins, is disentangling what is raw sensory data. What is it? And noticing how am I responding to it in my thought process, in my feeling process? What am I saying about it? And I think that, one final thing I'll say and then hand it back to you in case there's something that we need to kind of unpack from that is so we're talking about changing patterns, right? Whether it's a pattern of movement, a pattern of thought, an energetic pattern so that I'm able to relate with more wholeness with my child, any pattern that we'd like to change that's not serving our, desired state or desired outcome, we could call a holding pattern. And a holding pattern is always a combination of the physical, the emotional, the energetic, and the perceptual. There's never just one aspect of the body-mind involved in a holding pattern. There's a reason why the nervous system has set up a reaction to this information the way it has. It's a network of information. I mean, our sensory feedback from the environment and from ourselves goes through the limbic system. So it's immediately connecting with everything about survival and fear and emotion and motivation. It's all so interrelated.
Well, I can talk to you for a long time. I'm like buzzing with energy, like, oh, this is so good. So I want to talk about two things really specifically, but to help people picture like what this looks like. I've seen this as a trainer working, and maybe this is too global of an example, but I've seen this as a trainer working with a client who says, I don't like pull-ups. Like they'll say that in the first session, like, I don't like pull-ups. I can't do them. I've never been good at them. And, you work with them for a little bit of time. You can't push them too hard, too fast, but you work with them with a little bit of time and you get good at using the lats and you get good at using the core and you lose like 20 pounds and stuff. And so we address the pull-up machine. And what comes out is you find, hey, when I was like 12, I was in front of the pull-up bar and I couldn't do one and the other kids could. And so, I felt like a failure. And so I don't like pull-ups. I can't do pull-ups. And you have this person who's been walking around with that belief and that feeling, like they look at the pull-up bar and it scares them for 30 years. And even to the point where they have the strength, they can pull down their entire body weight. They have the strength, but once they get on that bar, for some reason, the brain's not talking to the rest of them. All of those things come together. And then, and this gives me chills as a trainer. And then after months, you finally do it. You've done eccentric stuff and you've done a band assist. And finally the person goes from a straight arm hang to a pull-up and they put their chin over the bar and everything changes. Now they come to your session like, can we start with pull-ups? I like pull-ups now because I can do them, and all of those things change. And whatever beliefs that were tied up into that, I'm no good at sports, I'm fatter than all the other kids or whatever. All of those things seem to switch in that moment of triumph, so to speak. And hearing you talk about the somatic system, how those things are kind of tangled up, untangling them. And that's not what the average trainer can do on the fitness floor, but that's what's happening. You're untangling them and addressing each one of them and then putting it together into a movement. Aha, pull up. Oh. And so you got me really excited. Now I want to go to pull-ups with people.
I love that you told that story because it's a perfect example how it's not about the pull-up. It's about the fundamental belief change. It's about breaking that holding pattern and creating something new, a new cortical map. That's a life-changing moment for that person. I mean, they feel really great they can do a pull-up. And of course, who's not going to brag about their pull-ups, right? There's bragging rights there. Absolutely. But it's so much bigger than the pull-up.
Well said. And I love that we're having this conversation because I'm always trying to help people understand that when you work out at the gym or you do your cardiovascular exercise or you're doing your somatic movements, it's not just the movement that's changing. Like there's a very deep connection with what you're doing and everything else that's going on in your present, maybe even in your past, maybe even in your future. It's deeply connected at the level of your movement practice. So we could talk about this for a long time. I guess I would like to kind of dive a little bit deeper into how you're teaching this sort of thing, because, you know, when I'm talking about the pull-up, it's pretty straightforward for me from a master trainer perspective. I need to isolate these kind of different muscle groups and I need to, you know, teach them that. I need to teach them control of a neutral spine. I need to teach them awareness and I need to, you know, make them more comfortable with different pieces of equipment. And then we progress through stabilization and the strength and then power. And then maybe my listeners are like, that's not basic, but that's how my mind works with regard to weight training. When you say, I want to teach a somatic movement, I want to help somebody get in touch with the conscious ability to experience their body in motion, that flies hardcore over my head outside of, you know, those more operational and analytic ways of thinking about it. So help me understand, how are you taking somebody from ground zero? Hey, Kayla, what kind of goals do they come to you with in that sense? Hey, Kayla, I want to work on XYZ, or I don't feel right. How are you starting that process? And maybe how can some listeners who are listening right now, how can they start the process of diving into somatic movement?
Gosh, that's a great question. There's a lot there. It seems maybe the first place we start, which isn't a direct answer to your question, but is to get after the unique approach within somatic movement education. And this might start with you and I talking about the art of teaching. Okay. So in the fitness world, generally as a personal trainer, the kind of way to teach somebody a movement is to instruct them. Put your leg here, stabilize this way, engage your core, breathe out on the, exertion, anchor through your glute. It's all of this how to build your body so that you can attain this shape with support, right? There's another side, which is guiding. And when you're guiding somebody in movement, the questions are open-ended and they're about promoting self-discovery on the person's behalf. And they actually become the teacher unto themselves. They are essentially the expert in their life. I might be the expert in movement when they come to me for movement education, but they're the expert in their life. And it's really important to me from a somatic movement education perspective that I use this full spectrum of the art of teaching, instruct, but also guide, because guiding is what allows my client to experience from the inside out what is happening in their body and then report back to me what it's all about. Right? I don't inherently know how my client experiences, for example, core support if I'm instructing and telling them what to do. But as soon as I ask them to explore what's happening in their body, what they sense, where there's tension, where there's weight, what they can feel is active, how their breath is moving, all of these kinds of things, and then they speak back to me, we've now created a feedback loop for learning. We've created a reciprocal relationship. And this is really what changes their ability to move somatically and to move with true support and what I would call efficiency and connectivity. I can tell my client, and I used to early in my career, I used to do a lot of instructing. a lot of instructing. You know what happened? People relied on me to get them into the right form, the right place, the right intensity, the right everything. And over time, I recognized that I had taken the somatic approach out as I entered the fitness floor because I was using that model really kind of in and of itself. And that in fact, that somatic container is incredibly important no matter what kind of movement your person is doing. They're doing a kettlebell swing, they're doing a pull-up, they're doing a breathing exercise, they're doing a yoga asana. That reciprocal feedback loop is kind of the base.
That's getting those trainer chills again. So the picture I had in my head was, so I'm hanging out with a 3-year-old. That's my stage of parenting right now. And there are certain things that like you have to instruct, like, no, don't run in the road. We can't be like, what do you think would happen if you kept running in that direction? Like, that's a truck and that's the end of your happy day, right? So there are certain things that are like, hey, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that kind of thing. But he's becoming aware of himself. And it's kind of cool to watch a little human being develop because you see yourself in like a smaller layer with a lot less complication. You're like, oh, that's me somewhere in there, like kind of, crawling out of his shell. And he's starting to perceive his own body. So right now, I'm really bad with feelings. I grew up without a dad, and I've always told myself, like, don't... There's a somatic belief for you right there. I'm really bad with feelings. We could dive into that, but I'd rather not. Like, hey, get over it, buddy. You're going to be fine. Put some dirt on it. That's how I, dealt with it myself. However, watching my little boy grow up, I can see that's not going to work. Either he's going to carry that on, or I'm going to have to overcome that for myself and teach him how to, hey, why are you upset, man? Take a deep breath. How are you feeling? We're a little tight, angry, anxious, upset. Okay. Tell me about that. What happened? Like, check in with yourself, feel that. And hearing you talk about that, I guess that's not movement based, but that's the difference in my mind between the instruction and the guidance piece, right? So it's the, hey, no, stand up straight, shoulders back, take a deep breath, rub some dirt on it and keep playing. Like, that's pure instruction. And maybe sometimes that works well from a parenting perspective. But the idea of him relying on me for the rest of his life to fix his feelings is not going to make it. I love that you said that because I feel that with regard to clients and that deep desire. And it took me a while too. I'd say I was probably 7-8 years into my training practice before I realized I don't want my clients to rely on me for everything in their workout. I want my clients to grow and mature and shape and be able to make some of their own calls or maybe all of their own calls from a movement perspective. And then I want them to enjoy what I get to enjoy from an exercise perspective, which is just kind of a deep gratitude for being able to move today. And you can't do that if you're relying on your trainer to move you and you're constantly looking at the clock like, when is this going to be over? Because I feel like I'm going to die. Mm-hmm. So you speak really deeply to this concept of, I would almost call it like self-reliance from a movement.
Self-regulation. So we're really talking about self-regulation.
Awesome. So tell me about some of the exercises. Well, not necessarily movements, unless that makes sense to you. Where are you starting? So, when I think about core training, we start with like controlling your body in a plank position or all fours, like a bird dog, for instance. That starts the core activation process and helps you to tap into some muscles and feel that and get control. Where are you starting when you are starting the somatic movement progression?
Yeah, love that. I'm a unique movement educator because I have a deep love for both sides. I love the exercise science piece and I love the somatic education piece. So your example of where we would typically see in fitness starting to train, isometric core stability in plank or bird dog is a great place to talk about how somatic movement education goes one layer deeper. So if we're talking not only about self-regulation, but also let's simplify that even, nervous system regulation. And it's so important that we're taking care of our own nervous systems. And in the process of working with a client or a child, the best learning potential is going to come from a relaxed and active state. And we could, look at this as being in the brain wave, kind of like the alpha cycle as opposed to the beta cycle. Most of our clients walk in the door, our kids come home from school and they are locked in beta. That's not a great place to learn from. It's definitely not conducive for, neurodevelopmental repatterning or changing behaviors. We've got way too much kind of like a chronic defense going on. There's my superpower move.
There you go. You can if you're listening to the podcast, but both Kayla and I, when we're talking about the beta waves, we're like shrugging our shoulders, we're putting our arms in front of us, we're crossing, and her superhero move just now is like a classic, like, block, you can't cross my arms, you can't blast me. That is beta. That's the beta brainwave. Like, you've been out in the world and you're, fighting off the wolf pack, so to speak, the email from your boss and the traffic and the kids at school making fun of your backpack or whatever. It's the defense mechanism of hyper-regulating your social sphere, so to speak. And so when you're talking about alpha, you're talking about the brain pattern that allows you to, I don't know, can you give some examples of what that maybe looks like if somebody doesn't understand the switch in the brain mindset there?
For sure. I mean, this, has been called flow state, by researchers. And so this feels like being in the moment, being engaged, you're challenged, but you can meet the challenge and you're loving the process. You lose sense of time. Athletes and performers of all types will talk about being in flow state when they're in the middle of the game or they're in the middle of the performance. But we meet these opportunities in our lives as well. I think our children, right, they're there most of the time. I don't know what the research is. It'd be really interesting to know that, the brainwave oscillations of young people. Now, beta is, we need that to hyper focus, like you said, but like so many things in our culture, we stay there way too long, too much. And we really have a lot of recovery required to reduce the toxic effects of being there. I mean, this is the cumulative stress response we're talking about, right? We all face it. We all know it. I said this earlier, it doesn't matter if you're athletic, active, or sedentary. Everybody knows what it's like to be stressed out. So in a somatic movement education approach, we would always look to helping our person regulate the nervous system. So generally with this kind of like core series, my core support series, especially with a new client, would be coming to the floor, lying on their back and beginning in what's called constructive rest position. So it's basically lying on your back with your knees bent, your feet on the floor, and starting to guide them into relaxation, active relaxation, which is called yield. Yield is a fundamental neurological action of how we respond to our environment and our connection with others. So yielding is a process of relaxing weight into the ground and really being in connection with the support of the ground moving back through us. So that ground reactive forces actually move back through the tissues. And I mean, that takes us into biotensegrity. That's a whole nother conversation, but yield is very powerful. Along with that breathing, guess what happens? We elicit the relaxation response. So I guide them into yield, guide them through a breathing practice. And in a few short minutes, they have come out of the chronic stress response and have probably started to increase their vagal tone, increase their heart rate variability, decrease their heart rate, decrease their blood pressure, and begin to think more clearly.
Alpha.
Yeah. So then, from there, we would work with actually the pelvis and exploring where neutral pelvis is, and then engaging one layer of support at a time with augmented rest in between. And there would be, again, this reciprocal feedback loop happening with the client so that they're really learning. This becomes a transferable skill set that they take into their life. And I didn't tell them to do it. They found it. They found it.
Because you guided and they responded in alpha. In the alpha right? So it's stuck there. So I don't want to curtail this part of the discussion, but it makes me think of, we live in a world that from a fitness perspective is very fatty, F-A-D-D-Y, not fatty, faddy, F-A-D-D-Y, in the sense that many people are looking for a fast fix for fitness or health related problems. Like, help me lose my weight, help me get my shoulder to feel better. I want to be ready for summer, that sort of thing. And one of the challenges that I face as a professional in this sphere is that many times that I've worked with people and helped them legitimately change their life, it takes time to build the foundation required to do the things that will eventually lead to weight loss forever, or eventually lead to being able to do a handstand push-up without hurting your shoulder. It takes a very long time to develop, even starting at the point where we're talking about being in a yield position and using your pelvis well. And I'm curious from one professional to another, and for the audience listening, when you think about the idea of, I want to start learning how to move better. And I want to think about taking a long-term view of my health and fitness. And I'm sick of the 6-pack abs in 12-week programs and fad diets that I'm going to, hang with for like 3 weeks and then, fall off with. How, in your experience working with clients, how do you help them to understand the value of this process in a world where that would look like it's moving too slowly? I'm going to teach you how to yield. I'm going to teach you how to control your pelvis. And that might be what we do for 30 minutes. And from the outside looking in, you're like, that's what you did. But you and I know that's valuable. And you and I know that's something that you're going to carry forever, right? So how do you help your clients and even the people that you're instructing build value in this process?
We're in a re-education profession in terms of really helping people understand what it takes to get meaningful and sustainable change. Painting the picture is good, I believe, and also reminding another person that the way they experience themselves in the world really has only a fraction to do with the way their body looks. So most people listening are like, that's not true. I want that, I want that, reduced body fat, and I want that, better looking leg, and I want that, muscle development on my shoulders, and I want that strength to do 20 push-ups and then to do 10 pull-ups. And so we can, here's an example, I can wake up today and feel amazing, like motivated, inspired. I'm going to get this done. I've got a clear plan ahead. I'm feeling good in my body. I'm breathing well. I'm positive. I'm bright. Any challenges that I have or personal goals that I'm working towards, I know that I've got them by doing the right thing today. And I'm just kind of like on it, right? Like I'm on it. I'm in a good way. The very next day, I can wake up with the absolutely opposite experience about who I am in the world. I'm a failure. I'm fat. My clothes don't fit well. I look horrible in this color. My hair looks lousy today. The body didn't change. The outside view of the body, took a picture of me yesterday, take a picture of me today. Nobody's going to know. The experience I'm having on the inside of me is worlds apart. So I bring this up because I think one part that I do with my clients is to help them recognize that we're getting after more than an objectified look of the body from the outside. Because you and I both know that somebody can be perfect weight, perfect fitness, whatever that means, eat perfectly, have a good job, have a good marriage, have good kids, all this stuff. And on the inside, in their experience, they are not well. Everything can be going right on the outside. So it's a process and it's progressive. So I set landmarks up. It's like, oh, okay, here's how we're going to be working over the next couple of weeks. And then if you're doing your work on your side, because repetition is key, practice is a requirement for any kind of change, then we're going to continue to progress in this way and meet these new successes and kind of landmarks as we go. I think on top of that, it's our job and our responsibility, Alex, to validate and remind our clients of the success that is occurring in each and every moment of their kind of plan or process in the way they work with us. And the underlying piece of that is that if they inherently don't trust my professional kind of advice or recommendation or whatnot, and or don't have the desire to actually do the work in themselves, then it's not going to be a good fit.
Man, I like you. I reach through the camera and give you just a big hug. Yeah, this is good. So I appreciate that. It takes a lot of clarity and experience to say that. And I hope those listening to this right now understand, like, that's years of working with people and hearing the hard stuff and seeing the triumphs and stuff and working personally in herself that lets Kayla say something like that. That's deep and powerful. And if you're listening to this, rewind and listen to that again, because like you got a sports tier right here for me. So the power then of building something worth having. In my practice, when I speak about goals, for instance, people will come pretty often. It's defining dad bod, right? And I start with the message of, hey, biology, not really on the side of the fit, powerful father when it comes to testosterone and serotonin and cortisol at its face. If you understand those things, however, then maybe you can do something about it. Maybe you can define the dad bod. what inevitably happens when you dive a little bit deeper and you start setting goals and stuff, what you really find is that people have a picture of heaven worth running toward, and they have a picture of hell worth running away from. And maybe body composition's a part of that, and maybe doing a pull-up is a part of that, and whatever. But the picture and the walking the line in between, like, hopefully every day I'm taking one more step toward the best version of me and best version of the way things could happen for my family and best version of my community and stuff. And one step further away from, maybe the genetic crap that I inherited and maybe some of the beliefs that I've been carrying for 30 years and that sort of thing. When you dive into that, then the question doesn't become like, what can I accomplish in 12 weeks? It's, here's my shining star that I've wished upon, so to speak. And here's my practice every day that's taking me one step closer to that. And 3 years from now, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you might even look the same. You probably won't, but you're not even close to the same person because of progressive progress. That's in economics, what is that? Incremental interest. I'm not an economist, but you take 1% interest over the next 100 years and you compound that interest over time.
Like exponential
there
change.
You go. Yes, it's exponential change such that, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're a different person. You might be in a different career place. You might be in a different mindset. You might be doing completely different things in the gym or on your Soma mat, whatever that is. It's deep incremental change because you took a long-term approach to a progressive program rather than trying to cobble together something that's going to look good on the outside but doesn't change the inside. So thank you for saying that. Can we talk about vagal tone, please? Because you dropped that word a second ago, and I think, as time's winding up here, this is one thing I just wanted to make sure people could kind of grab onto and use in their world.
Yeah.
First of all, what is vagal tone? And what are two things that we could be doing on a daily basis to get out of the beta, hurried, frenetic kind of being and dive more into that relaxation version of our parasympathetic nervous system?
Mm-hmm. Great. So polyvagal theory was coined and is really kind of the star child of Dr. Stephen Porges. So you can find his work and information online. I'm not going to go too in depth with vagal tone because it is quite a field and there's quite a lot to it. But I think where it really relates to us here is, one, I'll tell you what it is. It is the 10th cranial nerve, and it's the longest cranial nerve in the body. It goes down through the throat, connects to the lungs, connects to the heart, connects to the kidneys, and then ends up in the digestive tract. That's pretty profound. And another piece about this nerve is that it's parasympathetic. So it modulates the stress response, the fight or flight response. So that's important to know as well. Because it basically connects and contacts every kind of major and, required organ for life along the way, there has been quite a bit of research that has shown its importance in emotional wellness, depression, anxiety, this kind of self-regulation piece that we're talking about. It's intimately related to trauma. So there's a lot there. Being a parasympathetic nerve, it relates to the relaxation response. So one way for us to move out of beta into alpha or even other, brainwave patterns is to activate or increase the tone of the vagus nerve. That elicits the relaxation response, helps to decrease heart rate, blood pressure, all of these other markers that give us the feeling of better, just like pure and simple, we just feel better in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. So how do we increase vagal tone? Well, one of the simplest ways that's been researched is in conscious, attentive breathing, extend the exhale.
I just did it.
Extending the exhale. And normally I'll tell my clients to look at, I call it the 3x3 breath, 3 times a day, randomly, or when you're feeling your kind of nervous system baseline creeping up, right? And you can just kind of tell you're getting to your edge and you're feeling a little bit wiry and you're not responding to your kids the way you want to, or you're yelling at cars while you're driving, those kinds of things. That's a good time to do it too. But to find 3 conscious, attentive breaths with an extended exhale 3 times a day. Now, the reason that is so powerful is what we're really wanting to do is train the nervous system, just like when we're training the nervous system to do a proper pull-up. It's the same kind of thing, right? We need to do something with repetition and with practice over time. And then we actually can build a neural pattern called CTFO, chill out, or whatever you want to call it, relax, take the edge off. I always encourage my clients to name it something, right? So that's very effective. I actually do that practice with my son, who experiences quite a bit of overthinking and worry and is just constantly in his mind, and it keeps him from sleeping. And he's always going to be honest to me when he gives me feedback. And even for him, somebody who is not very naturally checked into the way his body feels, he can do 3 extended exhale breaths. And afterwards, he's like, hey, yeah, Mom, I feel better. I'm not even lying to you.
I might lie about some things, but this time right here, you don't even need me to lie because I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so the 3 by 3 breaths, meaning 3 times a day, give 3 breaths with an extended exhale.
Yeah.
That like a 5-second, 10-second, is it just till your lungs are empty? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in not forcing or creating strain, right? So if you get to the end of your exhale, you're like, no, you're that person. I've got more. I know exactly. Oh,
Guilty.
yeah.
Guilty.
Yeah. I've got the best exhale in the house.
I can do it for 20 seconds. Missing the whole point of the vagal tone. All right. So that's good.
And that's the conscious, attentive part.
Mm.
Where it's like not very many times in the day do most of us actually sense, experience, and witness how the body breathes.
Well said.
So that's the inner sensation piece, right? And that's the first part of being somatic and having what I call somatic leadership in your life, because somatics definitely has an activism role to play in our communities, is that registering how I am. Like checking in, like you were doing with your son, that story you had, right? Having a check-in process. So that's the second thing that I would offer is the way to begin tracking sensation or creating that gap, the other 95, the way to get at the other 95, we'll put it that way, is to begin checking in to the inner sensations of the body, inner attention. And without an agenda.
Well, because you don't know what you're going to find down there.
That's true.
You start checking in, you're like, whoa. But it's there and it's you, and eventually it won't be so scary and foreign. So that's one, the breathing piece, huge piece. I often attempt to integrate those two, but I really like how simple, just extending the exhale. You don't have to make it box breathing. It doesn't have to be like a meditative practice for 5 minutes. You can do this driving in your car, extend the exhale for 3 breaths. I love that. What would you say is another way to get started with this vagal tone enhancement?
Yeah, so simply really checking into yourself. So there's the 3 by 3 practice, which can be applied at any time during the day. There's also the separately, although that's checking into yourself, separately really noticing and registering how you are in a moment. So I think a great example is working with a difficult child, or not a difficult child, having a difficult moment with a great child. Right. Okay.
I'll say it. My child is quite difficult.
Yeah. So really showing up in that moment, fully embodied in yourself, would look like noticing how you are in your inner experience as you are in communication or instruction or coaching or whatever is going on with your kid, right? What is your experience in that moment? So checking yourself, bringing some conscious awareness and attention before the words come out, right? Before any action takes place. Is this really how you want to respond in this moment? And how do you know how you want to respond? Well, it begins by first checking in to how you are in yourself. I know that for me, I've had, quite a learning curve with parenting. I was the first parent of anyone I knew. I had kids quite young. I had no idea about any of it. So I learned quite a bit. And when I reflect back on my moments of parenting, the difficult times or difficult decisions or choices, the ones in where I can reflect on being embodied while I was working in the parenting moment, those are the ones that I can let go of in terms of, did I do okay? You know, we're always in reflection of our process, how we were in that moment. What could I do better? If I reflect on a moment where I was a little bit lost and I was reacting, I hold some emotion about that. I hold some grief about that. But in those moments where maybe I didn't make the best decision, but in that moment, I made the very best decision from an aware, conscious place. When I reflect back on that, I'm free. So along the way, we end up carrying less baggage about who we've been when we are actually embodied in the moment of relating with others.
At the very beginning of the show, you said that we're working to create a difference between reacting and responding. We're working to be able to do that. And I hear that in what you're saying here. And in the process of being able to check in with yourself, then you create the opportunity to respond rather than react. And you're saying that in reflection for you, that those are the times where you're like, I wasn't a bad mom. Even no matter what I did in that moment, hey, I responded. I responded the best I knew how with my full self. And that was it right there. As opposed to reacting where you might look back and go, really, man? Like I'm going to have to, I need some parenting classes and a book maybe. And and that's when you have to apologize like to your child. You're like, I'm sorry, bro. Like I'm still figuring this, daddy's figuring this out. Mm-hmm. So I want to encourage listeners as well, as we're wrapping this conversation up. I want to encourage listeners as well, as we're talking about this, that this can also be worked into your current exercise practice. Because I know many people who have gone to the gym and might be going through the motions, maybe even while listening to this, and you're not checked into what you're doing. You're not checked into how your body's feeling, if you have control of your breathing or not, how maybe this song might have affected you as opposed to this song in the middle of your weightlifting routine. And when you do that, when you're checked into yourself while you're exercising, whether it's bicep curls or a yoga handstand or running, when you're checked into yourself, it's been my experience that the experience is completely different. It's a very different thing. And it's even one that becomes kind of timeless and you're not watching the clock. Hey, I've only got 45 minutes to get this workout in. This kind of thing, when you check in and you're there, you look up and you're like, oh man, well, that was a good 45 minutes. Moving on. It was good. And I got something out of that. And I generally walk away from a session like that feeling much more positive about what actually happened. Who knows how my biceps grew? I don't know. Apparently I'm obsessed with my biceps. I've referenced them 3 times. They're easy. They're easy. I'm not that vain. But who knows if my biceps grew? Who knows if I beat my mile time, whatever. But I was checked into myself and experienced that workout, and it was fulfilling. So I would encourage everybody listening to take that thought and approach to themselves as well from this conversation.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with that. One great layer to be present with is your breathing while you're moving, while you're working. That's a very easy way to stay checked in. And then I would also say, as I'm working out, I like to oscillate between, being in the moment of the movement and then also scanning my body, basically going from foot and ankle, knee, hips, shoulders, all the way up, right? What's going on with each joint area, right? Doing just a kind of a quick scan that helps me understand how much effort can I put forth on the next set. Should I do a next set? Where am I potentially kind of like moving out of my optimal positioning to stay out of injury? So those are just 2 easy ways, checking into your breathing and then doing body scans occasionally throughout your workout so that you know how you should be training in each moment of the session.
Absolutely. It's almost like becoming your own trainer, like on the side of your shoulder. I've had clients say, yeah, I had a little Alex on my shoulder telling me to do X, Y, Z, right? And fine, okay, like I've incorporated some kind of strange, just dissociated personality in your mind that is Alex the trainer. I can live with that. So I use the example of like a cable row, right? A cable row is you sit on a bench and you've got your feet in front of you, your knees slightly bent, and you've got that thing in front of you, and you want to get that thing. That's real scientific. You've got your steel handle in front of you and your resistance pulling against you, and you want to squeeze your shoulder blades together and you want to breathe through that movement. And, depending on your rep range and stuff, it might be heavy, it might be light, whatever. But when I'm coaching somebody and they say, oh my gosh, we've done like thousands of cable rows, if I'm using the muscles right, like how can I make this new? How can I make this new and different? because there's quite a few different things you could do as opposed to a cable row. Or you can do the same old cable row, and now I want you to check into your feet, how they're pressed against the row machine. I want you to feel how your toes are or aren't grabbing, or how you're pulling your toes up into yourself during each repetition. I want you to check in with your calves. I want you to check in with your hamstrings and your pelvic girdle, and how your glutes are either engaged or not engaged, or how tall you're sitting through your spine, what happens when you arch your body forward, what happens when you arch your body backward. There's a lot of different things that you can do in every single movement that you've ever done, that you've done thousands of, where it changes the whole platform and experience of it because you consciously directed your mind to something different. You shook yourself out of the comfort zone and made that thing a new thing. And when you say that, I think, well, I could think of a lot of different things, but I think of how every opportunity to move could be an opportunity to check in with ourselves. And I find in a world where it's easy to be sedentary, that those movement opportunities are precious and good, and that maybe we could use those as a flip that switch to get back into the 95%, so to speak. So your words inspire me to go do like the most mundane workout and make it meaningful. Like that's, I kind of want to do that after this guy. Just go like, what are you doing, Alex? I'm doing like the Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everybody's done this workout, same 5 movements, but I'm going to be so into it. And it'll be different and good. And thanks for that.
Change the experience, change the pattern. Yeah.
Kayla, I could talk to you for a really long time, but I don't want to keep you that long. And I know that those who are listening to us are either walked away with a life-changing conversation and they're like, will these people stop trying to make this so meaningful? So thank you for nerding out with me about the consciousness and unconsciousness. I want to give you the last word for our listeners for defining dad bod. If they don't hear anything else from you today, what do you want to leave them with?
You are the expert in your own life, inevitably responsible and accountable to your actions and your experience in the world. Nobody else is at fault or has responsibility or has created the experience that you are in. And that's a big practice to work with. And the 3x3 breath will help you along the way.
If you need to take that one sitting down, taking deep breaths.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So good. Kayla, thank you so much. Again, if you want to get connected with Miss Kayla, you can find her at kaylajune.com. That's KAILAJUNE.com. Kayla, thanks so much for joining us on Defining Dad Bod.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been fun. It's always great talking to you. And I hope you have a fabulous Friday as you keep going in. And, you add in that Arnold Schwarzenegger 5 basic moves workout.
Yes. Yeah. And for everybody else, until next time, after taking a deep breath, that is, kick butt and take names.
Thank you for joining us for 1% Better today. Don't forget to subscribe for the podcast. Leave us a raving review to tell others how Better Daily has helped you in your journey. If you want more Better Daily, download our app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live. Use code POD to get 25% off your subscription. That's POD, all caps, to save 25% on your subscription. We all have a cross to carry. It's lighter when we do it together. Go to betterdaily.live today.